1 second. So you all know Wrigley, but I guess you met him in the last video. This is Luke. These are our good boys. Anyway, today I'm going to talk about outlining because we are in Camp NanoWriMo, but we're also heading towards regular NanoWriMo, and you might be doing a little bit of outlining for your own story. We're going to be talking a lot of writing advice leading up to NanoWriMo, so I wanted to start with outlining, and we're going to continue to go through a lot of subjects as the next few months go on. I'm going to put Wrigley down because he wants to go down. In the past couple weeks, we've talked about creating characters, coming up with ideas, whether or not you should outline or write by the seat of your pants. Today, we're going to follow up on all that by talking about my outlining process. I'm going to put Luke down as well because I'm going to grab some cards. So sometimes I will use index cards, and I want to go through my method of how I do that. You can go to any craft store, or I guess these days go online or do an order and pick it up in the parking lot. But essentially, you can get multicolored index cards, and I assign each of these a different meaning. As I'm going through a story, I use different colored cards to represent different things in the story. White cards, that is a finished scene. That is a scene that I know what happens in it, I know the function it serves, that is ready for writing. This stack, this is my urban fantasy story that I started outlining last year. I'm not sure when I'm going to write this. No current plans. It's something I'm working on in the background. But as you'll see, there are no white cards in this. But there are a lot of different colored cards. First of all, red cards I use to represent characters. Whenever I'm introducing a character, I put them on a red card so that I know a few things about them. Maybe age, physical description, the role in the story, personality traits, things like that. I've got a few red cards. I've also got a red card with a post-it note on it so that I can make sure to go back and address it. They don't tend to go anywhere unless I change a character's name or some descriptions about them. When I was doing heavy revisions on the superhero novel, I threw away a lot of red cards, but not as many as I did some of the others. Yellow cards are lines or scenes or specific moments that I want to make sure to include. When I have a bit of dialogue or a bit of narration that I want to make sure is in a scene, I'll put this with the accompanying white card so that I know what scene it goes with. Purple I use for story structure stuff. I did this for the Wizard novel and it worked really well. I haven't actually gone back to finish the Wizard novel, so we'll see, but at least during the outlining process it was helpful. I took the Dan Harmon story circle, a few other outlining guides, and broke them down to their component parts, and I put them on purple cards. So for example, one of the purple cards is the midpoint, so that I know where the midpoint is in the story. I've got 8 cards for the story circle. This is the card for part 1, which is you. You can find more information on the story circle, but essentially, a story can be summed up, a hero's journey can be summed up in 8 words. You, need, go, search, there's the midpoint comes after that, find, take, return, change. And the gist is that each of those words summarizes what the character goes through during that section of the story. It's a nice tool to help figure out where certain moments should fall narratively. If you're trying to figure out if the breakup with the friends happens, before the midpoint or after, you can use those to kind of help figure it out. So the purple cards kind of act as a guideline, kind of as the roadmap, if you will. Milestones, mile markers. I don't know, there's a lot of analogies for that. Green are general notes. They're not necessarily lines of dialogue. They're not necessarily story structure things. They're not necessarily completed scenes that will appear. They're more just things for me to keep in mind as I'm going through the outline. For example, this one mentions that the main character's arc for the urban fantasy novel is a version of pride to humility. For those who watched last week's video, you'll know that that's how I outline a lot of my characters' arcs. Is I will start with one of the 7 deadly sins, and then I will figure out which of these 7 heavenly virtues they need to learn or accomplish or reconcile with by the end of the story. You don't have to be religious for that method to work. I'm not Catholic. I just think it's a very helpful tool. And then the blue cards are the ones that do not stay in the outline before I start writing. Blue cards are either general ideas of scenes. For example, I've got here that the supporting character saves the main characters. I don't know from what, I don't know where they are, but I know I want that moment in there. I know what it pays off. I have a yellow card that leads into it, so I know the line of interaction that triggers it. I just don't know the context. Blue cards are also questions, like, for example, how did so-and-so get to such and such place? I need to know that. And, answering that question might mean turning that blue card into 3 or 4 or 5 white cards, plus maybe a couple of yellow cards and some green cards. But the general approach there is that the blue cards do not get to stay. When I was writing the superhero novel, I would lay these out on a wall. I would tape them to the wall, and then when I wanted to replace one of them, I had to take it off, rip it up. I didn't have to rip it up. I like the ceremonial moment of that. Whenever I remove a card, I like to rip it in half or rip it into quarters, because that is a very nice feeling that you are getting rid of that idea, throwing it away. When I was working on the superhero novel, I had all of these taped to the wall of my closet. I happen to have a pretty big wall in there that I could use just to cover with notes. The downside is that if I turn a blue card into several white cards, I have to move a lot of things down and move them to other columns. It was a lot to keep track of. But I definitely recommend that while you're working on these, you have some way to lay them out flat, ideally somewhere where nobody's going to bump into them. Maybe you can lay them out on your bed, as long as you don't have a dog that's able to jump up on there. Maybe you can lay them out on a table or a kitchen counter. Luke's playing with the foot of the tripod. You're wet. It feels like you peed somewhere. I definitely recommend that while you are working on outlining, you lay these out somewhere so that you can kind of see them all at once. It's very, very helpful. If you don't want to use physical cards, which that's totally fine, I kind of have a similar approach in Google Docs. If you have a Google document, you can assign different colored text or bold type to different elements. For example, notes can be italicized, character names can be indented or bulleted. You can use underlining for the purple cards, which would be the different sections of your story. Blue can be like bold and italicized and like, why is this person here? Question mark. That's the approach I'm actually using on my short stories. When it's not really worth busting out the cards for them, I'll just write on my Google Docs app while I'm taking a walk with the dogs. Additionally, Scrivener has basically a card feature. As long as you figure out some way to note what these different things represent, you can use those as a way to kind of lay out your story all at once. That being said, I still really like this method. There's something very, very helpful about being able to see everything as a physical card, flip through them, have them in your hands, essentially. I'm a very tactile person, so it really makes me feel good to have the cards and write things out. That is the approach I take when I outline my stories. But what about you? Let me know in the comments below. I'm always curious what methods are out there. I think everyone can benefit from seeing other people's methods and finding out if we're doing anything that the other people could steal. Like the video, then like the video. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Ring that bell. Also, I have a new website, michaeltchristensen.com. You can also get there by going to supergeekmike.com. Right now, it's just a link to my videos, as well as there's going to be some blog posts up there, but I have more ideas coming soon. I love you, Victoria. And so does Luke. Luke.